It's funny. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just like absolute precision.
Oh, absolutely. It's very cut and dry.
Right. Like you break your arm, they do the x-ray, and it shows that jagged, undeniable white line.
Yeah, and the doctor just points right at it on the screen.
Exactly. They just say, there it is. There's the fracture. It's mechanical. It's clean.
Well, it's comforting, really. I mean, we are totally wired to seek out the visible, the categorizable. A broken bone offers this perfectly linear narrative, right? Trauma, diagnosis, intervention, healing.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of human emotion. You cross that border into neurodevelopment or into trauma or
Yeah.
just the absolute free fall of heartache, and suddenly, well, that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally useless. You're flying blind.
Right. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. And I want to ask you, the person listening to us right now, have you ever felt that?
It's a very specific feeling.
It really is. Have you ever felt the stinging, visceral reality of a crushed dream, or maybe the quiet, ringing devastation of a relationship ending, and wondered, is this pain just a roadblock, or is it actually the map?
Ooh, yeah, that is the ultimate question, isn't it? Navigating human consciousness. Because unlike a fractured femur, a shattered ego or a broken heart doesn't present on an MRI.
I wish it did. It would save a lot of time.
Right. But you can't put a cast on a compromised sense of identity. Yet these invisible fractures completely alter the trajectory of a person's life. Honestly, often far more permanently than any physical injury.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We have two profound sources on the desk today, and I gotta say, they feel less like text and more like architectural blueprints of the human soul.
That's a great way to put it. They are dense but vital.
Yeah. The first is a 2024 work by Vipresh Dovedi called Ego Unmasked, Navigating Authentic Living. And the second is this incredibly moving, sometimes brutal anthology simply titled The Nature of Heartbreak.
It really pulls no punches, that one.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. And our goal today is to explore the ultimate human collision.
The collision between our internal architecture and the unforgiving physics of the external world.
Yes, exactly. What happens when our internal architect, which Dwighty identifies as the ego, crashes at high speed into the messy, unpredictable reality of love, failure, and deferred dreams.
It's a car crash of the psyche.
It really is. And I want to set the baseline right now for you listening. We aren't going to do some, superficial pop psychology skim of this material.
No, absolutely not. We need to go deep here.
We are going to treat these texts as a survival guide for the friction of being alive. Because if you understand the hidden operating system of your mind, you can fundamentally change how you process the malware of heartbreak and disappointment.
I love that framing. And to understand that operating system, we really have to move past the traditional, perhaps outdated Freudian models.
Right, the old school stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that treats the ego as merely a manager trapped between primal urges and societal guilt. Dwighty takes a fascinating departure in Ego Unmasked.
He really flips the script.
He does. What's fascinating here is he doesn't frame the ego as a monolithic villain or like a strict referee. Instead, he characterizes it as a participant in a highly complex, delicate dance with our core authenticity.
I found that framing so compelling because, in popular culture, we constantly hear phrases like, leave your ego at the door.
Right, or you hurl massive ego at someone as an insult.
Exactly. The cultural assumption is that the ego is purely toxic, like it's something to be completely eradicated if you want to be enlightened.
But Dwighty is arguing something far more nuanced. He's saying the ego isn't an infection, it's an adaptation.
Wait, so he's saying we actually need an ego? Because that feels very counterintuitive to everything we're taught.
Yes, we absolutely need it. If we look at the mechanics of early neurodevelopment, the ego is essentially a survival mechanism.
Okay, walk me through that. How does that start?
Well, from the moment a child enters the world, they're just bombarded with an overwhelming stream of sensory and social data.
Just a wall of noise and lights and faces.
Exactly. And they receive continuous feedback about what elicits warmth and what elicits rejection. The ego forms as a protective scaffolding.
Oh, scaffolding. I like that word for it.
Right. It helps the child navigate social hierarchies, establish physical and emotional boundaries, and differentiate their own consciousness from their caregivers. It is a necessary cognitive sorting hat, if you will.
A cognitive sorting hat. Okay, let's unpack this because I want to make sure I'm not misinterpreting his angle here.
Go for it.
If the ego is a necessary protective scaffolding, Why is it causing us so much suffering as adults?
Yep.
Like, is it just that a defense mechanism built for a 5-year-old is completely maladaptive for a 35-year-old?
That is exactly the friction Dwight highlights. The scaffolding overstays its welcome.
It doesn't come down when the building is finished.
Precisely. The problem isn't the existence of the ego. The problem is its rigidity and its tendency to distort reality.
Okay, so how does he break that down? Because he categorizes it, right?
He does. He categorizes the modern ego into 3 functional states. The first is the inflated ego.
The classic one we all think of.
Right. This is the architecture that requires constant external validation to maintain its structural integrity. It seeks dominance to mask an underlying terror of insignificance.
Okay, let me try an original analogy here to ground this, because I was thinking about this a lot last night.
Let's hear it.
Think of your mind as a smartphone.
Yeah.
Okay. And the ego is the foundational operating system.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Right. So when you buy the phone, the OS is essential. You literally cannot make calls, run apps, or interact with the digital world without it. It translates your inputs into actions.
It's the mediator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But over time, the system gets bloated. An inflated ego, in this analogy, is like a piece of malware that has hijacked the battery.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It is constantly running in the background, desperately scanning for network connections, draining your energy, demanding attention, and trying to override all the other organic applications.
I love the granularity of that analogy, particularly the concept of battery drain, because the cognitive load required to maintain an inflated ego is it's staggering.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. It requires hypervigilance. You are constantly monitoring how others perceive you, adjusting your behavior to ensure dominance or admiration.
Just burning through your battery all day long.
Exactly. And it leaves almost no psychological bandwidth for genuine curiosity or authentic connection.
Right. And then you have the polar opposite end of the dysfunction, which Dweidi calls the fragile ego.
Yes, the fragile ego.
So if the inflated ego is malware hogging the battery, the fragile ego is an operating system with 0 air handling protocols.
Oh, that's good.
Like the slightest unexpected input, a critical comment at work, an unreturned text message, a minor failure, and the entire system encounters a fatal error and reboots.
The blue screen of death.
Yes, it just goes to a black screen. It completely recoils from vulnerability or uncertainty.
The lack of error handling is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The fragile ego lacks internal stability because its code is written entirely in response to external conditions.
It has no core of its own.
Right. It hasn't built internal resilience, so any negative feedback isn't processed as, just data to be evaluated. It's processed as a lethal threat to the organism's identity.
Which causes that blue screen panic.
Exactly. It causes immediate withdrawal or severe defensive panic.
Which makes me wonder, and I want to push back on Dwight's premise just a bit here.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate.
If both the inflated and fragile egos are this destructive, isn't the end goal just to delete the OS entirely? Like, to achieve total ego death?
Oh, well, Dwight would argue that total ego death, while, a very popular concept in certain spiritual circles.
Right, the silent retreats and all that.
Yeah, but it isn't a functional state for navigating modern human existence. I mean, you still need to advocate for your salary, set boundaries with a toxic family member, and frankly, navigate traffic without getting run over.
Okay, fair point. You need some sense of self to drive on the highway.
Exactly. And this is where his third category, the healthy ego, comes into play. A healthy ego is a well-optimized background process. Ah, okay, so it's not deleted, it's just patched.
It is optimized, it finds harmony amidst complexity. A healthy ego allows you to maintain a distinct sense of self without demanding that the universe conform to your preferences.
It's flexible.
Very. It doesn't shatter when criticized because it doesn't view criticism as an existential threat.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it is transparent enough to let what Dwight calls the radiant light of authenticity shine through.
It gets out of the way.
It steps aside when vulnerability is required.
But let's look at the environment we are trying to run this optimized OS in, because I feel like we are operating in a hypermodern culture that is aggressively, relentlessly designed to cultivate inflated and fragile egos.
Oh, undoubtedly. The cultural infrastructure rewards the dysfunction.
Right. We are swimming in an ocean of metrics. Likes, followers, retweets, views. How does a healthy ego even survive when the entire societal system literally rewards the malware?
It requires an immense amount of intentional friction. Dweig argues that in a validation-obsessed culture, true self-esteem cannot be built on comparative metrics. You can't use their scoreboard.
Exactly. It has to be built through mindfulness and a rigorous practice of detachment. You have to observe your own ego-driven thoughts, like, the spike of jealousy when a peer gets a promotion, or the flush of pride when a post goes viral.
We've all felt that.
Right. But you have to recognize them as output from the OS, not as the core truth of who you are.
Oh, that's so good. It's the mental equivalent of opening your task manager, seeing the ego taking up 90% of your CPU, and manually hitting force quit on that specific thought process.
Yes, exactly. It is about emotional intelligence. You aren't suppressing the emotion. You are refusing to let it dictate your behavior.
Man, I want you, the listener, to reflect on this right now. Think about the specific masks you wear to navigate your week.
We all have several?
We do.
Yeah.
Which mask do you put on for your morning stand-up meeting? Which one do you wear when you visit your parents? And honestly, critically assess the battery drain.
That's the real test.
How much energy does it take to keep that mask perfectly positioned? Because if you are collapsing onto the couch at 7 p.m. feeling completely hollowed out, it might not just be your workload.
It rarely is just the workload.
Right. You might be experiencing the sheer, unadulterated exhaustion of maintaining an inflated or fragile ego.
The exhaustion is a primary diagnostic symptom that the ego has become maladaptive. Because maintaining a facade inherently limits your potential. You're spending all your resources defending a perimeter rather than cultivating the garden inside.
But here is the terrifying catch. An operating system, even a beautifully optimized healthy one, is relatively safe when it's operating in a vacuum.
True.
Like you can meditate on a mountain alone and feel incredibly balanced. But the true stress test happens when that system has to network with another completely different, unpredictable human operating system.
And that is where the real chaos begins.
Right. And that brings us to the profound, messy heart of our second source, the nature of heartbreak, and the paradox of human connection.
What's fascinating here is how the nature of heartbreak establishes a foundational premise, that human connection is not a luxury. It is a biological and psychological imperative.
We literally need it to survive.
We are a social species. Our neurobiology is wired for attachment from the moment of birth.
The anthology talks about how in childhood we forge bonds so easily. It's built on proximity and play. You share a sandbox, you build a castle together, and suddenly you are best friends.
Because the ego hasn't fully hardened its defenses yet.
Exactly. But as we transition into adulthood, the requirements for connection shift dramatically.
The stakes are exponentially raised. Adult relationships, whether romantic, deep platonic, or even, profound professional collaborations, they demand a terrifying currency.
Absolute vulnerability.
Absolute vulnerability.
And terrifying is almost an understatement. The text defines vulnerability not just as like sharing secrets, but as exposing the unedited, unpolished core of your identity.
The raw data.
Right. It's offering up your fears, your profound insecurities, and your past failures to another person, knowing full well they have the power to weaponize them against you.
And this is precisely where Dwivedi's ego framework collides with the reality of connection. The ego's prime directive is protection and continuity of the self.
Keep the fortress secure.
Exactly. Vulnerability is the deliberate lowering of the drawbridge. It is the antithesis of the ego's mandate.
It goes against all the programming.
It does. By being vulnerable, you invite the possibility of being misunderstood, rejected, or abandoned, which, to the primitive ego, feels like psychological death.
Which creates what the anthology calls the paradox of connection. I have to tell you, I had to put the book down and walk around my living room when I read this part.
It's a heavy concept.
It is. The paradox is that we possess a desperate, bone-deep craving for meaningful relationships, yet we actively, almost subconsciously, sabotage them.
We push people away.
We push people away because the terror of being hurt outweighs the desire for intimacy. We are freezing to death, but we keep throwing water on the fire because we're afraid a spark might burn us.
It is the ultimate approach avoidance conflict. And if we examine the modern landscape, technology has provided a highly seductive, ultimately destructive loophole to this paradox.
Oh, the digital facade.
The digital facade.
Yes. It is the ultimate playground for Dwivedi's inflated ego. We are handed tools to meticulously curate an idealized version of ourselves.
We become our own PR teams.
Literally. We filter out the blemishes, we draft and redraft our casual texts, we post the highlight reel of our vacations, while completely omitting the screening argument we had in the hotel room.
The psychological danger here is profound. The digital facade is an attempt to hack the system.
How so?
Well, it's an attempt to achieve the neurochemical rewards of connection, the likes, the comments, the perceived admiration, without ever paying the toll of vulnerability.
You want the warmth without sitting near the fire.
Exactly. But the human brain is highly attuned to authenticity. When we interact with idealized avatars rather than real people, the connections remain inherently superficial.
It's essentially two PR representatives having a meeting while the actual humans are locked in separate basements.
That is a terrifyingly accurate image.
Right. And what happens when PR reps try to negotiate love? It creates a massive deficit of psychological safety. The text notes that because everyone is projecting perfection, it fosters a silent epidemic of inadequacy.
You are comparing your messy, unedited behind-the-scenes footage to everyone else's perfectly graded theatrical trailer.
And furthermore, when conflict inevitably arises, because conflict is a feature of human interaction, not a bug, the digital facade has no mechanism for repair.
Not at all.
The anthology emphasizes that forgiveness and active listening are the bedrock of enduring connection. And forgiveness requires looking at another person, acknowledging their flaws, their missteps, and their human frailty, and deciding that their worth supersedes their mistake.
But the ego hates forgiveness.
It despises it.
Forgiveness requires relinquishing the moral high ground. The fragile ego wants to say, you triggered my insecurity, therefore you are toxic, and I must cut you off to preserve my safety.
It's the modern culture of immediate disposability.
Exactly. Disposability is the ego's preferred method of conflict resolution because it requires zero introspection.
It's just swipe left, delete, block.
Right. True, active listening, where you genuinely seek to understand the emotional reality of the other person without preparing your defense, is an act of profound ego suppression. It requires you to admit that your perception of reality might be incomplete.
This makes me wonder about the long-term societal impact. Like if we have an entire generation whose primary mode of interaction is filtered, curated, and easily disposable, does the analog reality of love become too abrasive to endure?
It's a real concern.
If your entire relational skill set is built on swiping away discomfort, what happens when you're sitting across from a real, flawed human being whose voice is shaking, who is bringing up a difficult truth that triggers your deepest insecurities? You can't just close the app.
No, you can't. And what happens is you experience a system failure. The fragile ego panics, misinterprets the discomfort as danger, and triggers an escape protocol.
And we actually see this exact dynamic play out in the source material. The Nature of Heartbreak doesn't just theorize about this, it gives us devastatingly specific case studies.
Let's get into those.
Let's examine the heartbreak of the analog and the digital. The anthology presents two narratives that perfectly mirror this tension: the lover and the programmer.
These two narratives serve as masterful, opposing studies of the ego under extreme relational stress. Let's begin with the analog devastation of the lover.
I found this story almost difficult to read because the environmental storytelling is just so visceral.
It really puts you in the room.
It does. The narrative begins with the lover returning to a home that has been abruptly, inexplicably hollowed out by a sudden departure. And the author focuses intensely on the physical space.
Right, the inanimate object.
The plush couch that used to physically cradle hours of intimate conversation. The sturdy kitchen table that hosted raucous family dinners and quiet Sunday mornings.
The focus on the physical environment is a brilliant psychological device because in a long-term connection, our ego and our identity actually extend into our environment.
Like we leave pieces of ourselves in the room.
Exactly. The shared space becomes a physical manifestation of the shared identity. So when the partner vanishes, the environment doesn't just become empty, it becomes a hostile reminder of the fractured self.
A hostile reminder.
Now, it creates a massive predictive processing error in the brain. The brain expects the partner to be on the couch. When they aren't, the discrepancy registers as profound grief.
The text describes it as a heavy shroud of emptiness. And sitting right in the center of that heavy shroud on the kitchen table is a solitary, crumpled note that simply reads, "I'm sorry."
Just brutal.
That's it. No explanation. No closure.
That note is the ultimate psychological torture for the ego because the ego requires narrative coherence to function.
It needs a story.
It needs to know why something happened so it can categorize the threat and protect against it in the future. A simple, "I'm sorry," provides zero data.
It's an unhandled exception.
Exactly. It forces the lover's ego to spin wildly, generating thousands of terrifying potential narratives. Was I not enough? Was it someone else? Was it a lie from the beginning?
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How does the lover respond to this catastrophic system failure? Because the default ego response would be rage.
Right, lash out.
It would be entirely natural for the ego to protect itself by demonizing the partner, deciding they were a monster, and aggressively sealing off the heart. But the lover doesn't do that.
No, they take a very different path.
Instead, they sit to the agonizing ambiguity and they turn to journaling.
Journaling in this context is a profound mechanism of cognitive reappraisal. The text explicitly notes that through writing, the lover attempts to unravel the tangled knots of emotion.
They're untangling the wires.
Yes, they are externalizing the pain, getting it out of the echo chamber of the panicked ego and onto paper where it can be objectively observed.
They give voice to the thoughts that felt entirely isolating. And through this agonizing, deliberate process, they arrive at an incredible realization.
A breakthrough.
They realize that love is not a fixed state. There's a highly fluid journey of holding on and letting go.
That realization is the sound of a healthy ego solidifying.
Oh, I love that. The sound of a healthy ego solidifying.
It really is. The lover recognizes that the heartbreak is not a failure of the relationship, nor is it a personal indictment of their worth. The text eloquently frames this. The cracks in our hearts serve as testaments to the depth of our experiences.
Yeah, the quote in the book was amazing.
It was. The grief is simply the receipt for a love that was profoundly real.
The grief is the receipt. Wow. They allow the heartbreak to be a painful but vital truth rather than an ego-destroying failure. Now, contrast the end of that deep analog connection with the terrifying inception of a new one in our second story, The Programmer.
Such a stark contrast. Where the lover is dealing with the painful severing of attachment, Alex, the protagonist of our second narrative, is dealing with the sheer terror of initiating it.
The terrifying beginning.
Right. Alex is a software developer. He lives his entire life in a realm where logic, syntax, and determinism reign supreme.
He prefers flawless code to the unpredictable, chaotic mess of human emotion, because code obeys rules.
If you write it correctly, it executes perfectly every single time.
Humans do not. But Alex meets a woman named Mia, and they meet on a programming forum.
Their entire initial courtship occurs within the digital safety net. They bond over shared code bases, they collaborate on a blog.
It's very insulated.
It is. They spend hours on video calls, mediated by screens and latency. It is a connection built entirely through the digital facade.
And you can see exactly why Alex feels secure here. The digital realm allows his fragile ego to maintain absolute control.
He dictates the pace.
Exactly. If she asks a difficult question, he can pause, draft a response, debug his own emotional output, and hit send only when it perfectly aligns with the image he wants to project.
There is zero risk of an unhandled exception.
None. But then, the tension inevitably builds. Mia proposes meeting IRL in real life, at an artisanal coffee shop, and the moment the digital barrier is threatened, Alex is paralyzed by anxiety.
His reaction is a textbook illustration of the friction between the digital facade and analog vulnerability.
The clash of the two worlds.
Exactly. Alex's fragile ego realizes that in a physical space, there is no latency. There is no backspace key.
You can't edit yourself in real time.
No, he is terrified that his real, unedited self, a self that stumbles over words, a self that feels socially awkward, will fail to meet the expectations established by his curated digital avatar. He fears the chemistry won't translate.
So the day arrives, he walks into the coffee shop. And the text gives us these great sensory details. The chime of the bell on the door, the rich, overwhelming aroma of roasted coffee, the ambient noise of real people.
A total sensory overload for someone used to a quiet room and a screen.
Totally. At first, they fall into their familiar rhythm. But as the date progresses, the analog reality sets in. Alex notices a subtle, undeniable unease. Mia's gaze starts to drift. A shadow crosses her expression.
This is the critical juncture. The fragile ego's protocol in this moment is to initiate a defense sequence.
Red alert.
Right. It usually looks like projection. She's bored, she's stuck up, this was a mistake, I need to leave before she rejects me.
Exactly. He could have just checked his phone, made an excuse, and bolted. But instead of letting his ego dictate his actions, Alex makes a terrifying leap into genuine vulnerability.
He breaks the pattern.
He does. He looks at her, drops the facade, and simply asks, "Mia, are you okay?"
It's a simple question, but it shifts the entire dynamic from performance to genuine inquiry.
It's not about him anymore.
Right, and Mia responds with equal vulnerability. She admits that she's overthinking the encounter, that the transition from screen to reality is overwhelming her.
And then Alex delivers what I think is the most profound line in the entire story. Stepping completely outside of his ego, he confesses his own internal reality. He says, I think I just want everything to be perfect.
That confession is the shattering of the facade. He admits to his desire for control, which ironically is the very thing preventing connection.
I think I just want everything to be perfect. I want to bring my smartphone analogy back here, but apply it to how Alex views relationships.
Let's do it.
Alex has been treating human connection like a software installation. You download the executable file, you click install, and as long as the base code is clean, it just runs flawlessly in the background forever.
A set it and forget it relationship.
Exactly. But human beings are inherently non-deterministic. We are constantly changing variables. Alex's realization in the coffee shop is that love cannot be coded flawlessly. It is not a static program.
It is a live service.
It's an MMO. It requires constant updates, continuous server maintenance, and active debugging.
That's a great way to look at it.
The text explicitly notes that Alex realizes he has to apply the same immense diligence and patience to his relationship that he applies to his most complex code bases. They have to actively schedule date nights away from the safety of their screens to sustain the connection in the messy, unpredictable analog world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what is truly fascinating here is the thematic juxtaposition of these two narratives.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the lover is forced to navigate the devastating demolition of an established connection, learning to find profound meaning and identity in the rubble.
Right.
The programmer is forced to navigate the terrifying, uncontrolled inception of a connection, learning to embrace imperfection and relinquish control.
But both require the exact same psychological tool, the deliberate shedding of the ego and the embrace of radical, unprotected vulnerability.
Without that shedding, the lover becomes permanently embittered, and the programmer remains permanently isolated.
So if you are listening to this on your commute or while washing dishes, I want you to internalize this. Whether you are currently staring at an empty room where a deeply held relationship used to live, or you're staring at a terrifying new opportunity that makes you want to retreat behind a screen, vulnerability is not liability.
It's really not.
It is not a weakness. It is the only viable path to genuine, sustaining connection. It is the only way to write the code of a real life.
It requires immense courage, but the alternative is a life lived entirely in simulation.
Now, as intense as romantic and interpersonal heartbreak is, it's not the only collision we face.
No, definitely not.
Sometimes, the most profound, identity-shattering heartbreak we experience is the relationship we have with our own future, the future we promised ourselves we would achieve. And that brings us to the fourth movement of our deep dive, the heartbreak of the unfulfilled, or dreams deferred.
This section represents a critical shift in the anthology. Chapter 2 of The Nature of Heartbreak moves away from relational loss and delves into the trauma of thwarted ambition.
It's a tough read.
It is. We are introduced to the deeply poignant narrative of the college dropout.
I have to admit, this story hit me harder than the romantic ones.
Really? Why is that?
Because it's just so relatable on a systemic level. We are introduced to a young student who has dreamed, quite literally since childhood, of becoming an engineer.
Right, it was their entire focus.
They didn't just have a vague wish. They had built their entire adolescent identity around this goal. They mapped out their high school courses, sacrificed their social life, and finally achieved the golden ticket, an acceptance letter to a prestigious, highly competitive engineering program.
The ego has fully attached itself to the narrative of the triumphant engineer.
It's locked in.
But then, the physical reality of the external world collides with that narrative. The text describes a cascading series of systemic and financial realities.
Real life gets in the way.
Right. The student's family is hit with medical emergencies. Rising bills stack up. Unexpected repairs drain what little savings they have.
It's the ultimate friction between meritocracy and reality. The student doesn't just give up, they try to shoulder an impossible burden. You can practically feel the exhaustion bleeding through the text.
It's palpable.
They take on a job at a local diner and then add a second shift at a retail store. Late nights wrestling with advanced calculus blur violently into early mornings, serving coffee to commuters.
Cognitively, this state of prolonged sleep deprivation and chronic stress absolutely obliterates executive function.
You literally can't think straight.
You can't. Unsurprisingly, the student begins falling behind academically. But the academic failure isn't the true trauma, it's the psychological fallout. The text highlights a profound, crippling sense of imposter syndrome.
Yes. They look around the lecture hall at peers who aren't carrying this crushing financial weight, peers whose only job is to study, and the student internalizes the struggle as a personal defect.
They blame themselves.
They feel like a fraud. And ultimately, the fatal blow lands. An email from the bursar's office regarding missed tuition deadlines. They are forced to pack up their dorm room and drop out.
If we analyze this through the specific lens of Dewey's Ego Unmasked, particularly chapters 6 and 11, which dissect ego, failure, and identity, we can understand why this event is so psychologically catastrophic.
Break that down for us.
Well, the label of dropout is not just a change in enrollment status, it is an ego death. The student had engaged in what psychologists call identity foreclosure.
Identity foreclosure. Meaning what?
Meaning their entire sense of self-worth, their fundamental value as a human being, was inextricably tied to the noun engineer.
I'm an elite engineering student, therefore my existence is justified.
Precisely. The ego had anchored its survival to that specific external validation. When that identity is stripped away by macroeconomic forces entirely outside of the student's control, the fragile ego completely collapses.
Because the anchor's gone.
Exactly. It interprets the systemic failure as a moral failure. The student is drowning in shame and inadequacy.
But this is where the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the concept of unmasking takes center stage. The student moves back to their hometown. They take on full-time shifts at the diner to help keep their family afloat.
A very humbling experience.
Very. And they have to watch, through the toxic lens of social media, as their former cohort posts photos of graduation ceremonies and signing days at tech firms. Talk about a brutal stress test for the ego.
It is the ultimate crucible, but within that crucible, a pivot occurs.
And it's such a subtle pivot.
It is. The student, while working at the diner, notices the restaurant's website is archaic and dysfunctional. Out of sheer curiosity and perhaps a need to exert some control over their environment, they volunteer to rebuild it.
They just start tinkering.
Right. They start teaching themselves to code during their breaks.
And they discover a profound, genuine passion for it.
Which is the crucial moment of unmasking. Letting go of the rigid, ego-driven, societal identity of degreed engineer allowed them to discover an authentic, intrinsic purpose.
The drive changed.
It did. The drive was no longer about the prestige of the title, it was about the act of creation. They begin attending local, grassroots tech meetups. They network based on skill, not pedigree. Eventually, they secure an internship at a scrappy startup.
Okay, I have a probing question about this process, and I think this is something almost everyone listening has wrestled with at some point.
Let's hear it.
If our dreams are the engines that drive us forward, if they give us hope and purpose, but holding onto them too tightly causes immense, crushing suffering when reality interferes, how do we know the difference?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do we know when to pivot, like the dropout brilliantly did, and when we're supposed to just grit our teeth and push through the pain?
That is perhaps the most difficult question of adult development. It hinges entirely on the distinction between the ego's ambition and the authentic self's expression.
Okay, unpack that difference for me.
Well, the ego demands a highly specific, static outcome. The prestigious degree, the C-suite title, the specific salary bracket, the validation of society. Authenticity, however, demands the expression of a core drive.
Oh, so it's about the verb, not the noun.
Exactly. The dropout realized, through the stripping away of their ego, that their authentic drive wasn't necessarily the societal title of engineer. Their authentic drive was the desire to build, to problem solve, to architect systems.
And they could do that anywhere.
Right. They found a new medium web development and coding to express that exact same authentic drive. You know it is time to pivot when the rigid form of the dream is destroying your mental health, but you realize you can keep the essence of the dream alive in a different vessel.
The essence versus the form. That is incredibly clarifying. And I'd argue that our modern societal narratives completely fail us here.
Oh, totally. They set us up to fail.
We are relentlessly sold this toxic, hyper-individualistic idea that success is a straight, upward-sloping line. Work hard, never give up, and you will inevitably achieve your exact dream. But that narrative is a fantasy. It rarely accounts for systemic barriers, crippling medical debt, or the reality of a family's financial collapse.
Dwight's work on shedding the ego is incredibly urgent in this context. The fragile ego desperately buys into that societal narrative of the straight line
It
because it craves certainty.
wants a guarantee.
Right. When we inevitably deviate from that line because life is nonlinear, the ego punishes us with intense shame. By unmasking the ego, the dropout was able to redefine success on their own terms. They neutralized the toxic label of dropout.
They took a word that was meant to be an ending, stripped it of its shame, and turned it into the inciting incident of a much more interesting, resilient story.
That's exactly what happened.
But we have to acknowledge a painful reality here. The dropout sacrificed an academic dream to step in and save their family. But what happens when the situation is inverted?
Yes, the other side of the coin.
What happens when pursuing your authentic dream requires you to leave your family behind?
That introduces a deeply complex emotional friction, and it leads us into the final movement of our discussion today. The tension between love and ambition, illustrated by the narratives of the small-town dreamer and the artist.
Let's start with the small-town dreamer. This story captures a very specific, agonizing tug-of-war.
It really does. It's so common.
We have a young person raised in a tight-knit, deeply rooted community. The family's core values are based on proximity, loyalty, and safety. Staying close to home is equated with love. But the dreamer possesses a burning, undeniable desire for the expansiveness, diversity, and chaotic energy of a big city life.
The emotional friction here is palpable and devastating. The dreamer deeply loves their family, yet feels intellectually and experientially stifled.
Like they're suffocating in a warm room.
Exactly. And then the catalyst arrives, an acceptance letter to a prestigious university located in a massive, bustling metropolis.
The ticket out.
Right. The dreamer presents this triumph to their parents, expecting celebration, and instead, the parents' faces fall. The father looks at them and asks, "But what about us? What about your home?"
Man, that question, what about us, is just gutting. It's the sound of a heart breaking in real time. But it's also, if we look closely, an ego threat, isn't it?
It absolutely is. This is a classic example of the ego's fear of the unknown, which Dovey covers extensively when discussing ego and personal growth.
How does the ego process that fear?
The parent's ego perceives the child's departure not as a natural step of development, but as a rejection of their values and a threat of abandonment. Conversely, the dreamer's fragile ego struggles with immense guilt, internalizing the false narrative that pursuing their authentic self inherently makes them a selfish, bad child.
So the student packs up and moves to the city anyway.
Mhm.
And the text describes this overwhelming culture shock. They are thrust into a frenetic pace, surrounded by diverse perspectives, relentless ambition.
It's dizzy.
It is. They feel a thrilling sense of intellectual belonging they never experienced at home, but simultaneously, they are consumed by a hollow, aching homesickness. They endure these stilted video calls where the mother's only question is, "When are you coming home?"
This raises an important question, I think, for everyone listening. Can we ever truly pursue our highest, most authentic aspirations without inflicting pain on the people who love us?
It feels like an impossible binary choice.
Yeah.
Either I betray my potential or I betray my roots.
The beauty of the anthology's conclusion is that it rejects the binary entirely.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
Right. The text suggests that resolution lies in harmonization. As the dreamer matures and their ego solidifies into a healthy state, they realize that pursuing their dreams in the city doesn't require the psychological severing of their roots.
They don't have to choose one or the other.
Exactly. They find balance by leveraging their new big city skills and networks to support local community service projects back in their hometown.
They literally build a bridge between the two worlds. They integrate their ambition with their heritage, proving that authenticity isn't about running away. It's about expanding your capacity to give back.
Exactly. It's an expansion, not an escape.
But external relationships aren't the only casualties on the road to our dreams. Sometimes the harshest violence is inflicted on our own self-worth. Which brings us to our final narrative, the artist.
The essay titled On the Pursuit of Aspirations offers an intimately vulnerable look at the internal war of the creative process. It details an artist struggling with the paralyzing fear of external judgment and the agonizing sting of professional rejection.
The artist writes about how, as a child, drawing and painting were pure, unadulterated joy. There was no ego involved. It was just creation.
This flow.
Right. But as they grew older, societal conditioning crept in. Relatives asked how they were going to make a living. Peers questioned if art was just a naive fantasy. By the time they decided to take their art seriously, the joy had been replaced by a wall of fear.
The ego took the wheel.
Totally. Every time they sat at the canvas, the internal monologue was just screaming, "What if I'm not good enough?"
And then they begin submitting their work to galleries, and the rejections start rolling in. Form letters, silent dismissals, criticisms.
The absolute worst.
Here again, we see the fragile ego completely recoiling from the friction of the external world.
Hmm.
To the fragile ego, a gallery rejection is never just a subjective commentary on a specific arrangement of paint on canvas.
It's taken so personally.
It is interpreted as an absolute permanent indictment of the artist's fundamental worth as a human being.
So what does this all mean? How does the artist survive this? Because so many people just quit at this stage.
That's the tragic part. Many do.
The text points to two specific survival mechanisms. The first is community relying on mentors who believed in their vision and provided a network of solidarity. But the second is a highly specific internal practice. They adopted the rigorous habit of celebrating small wins.
I want to highlight the psychology behind celebrating small wins because it is a profound anti-ego technology.
Oh, anti-ego technology. I like that.
The inflated ego operates purely on grandiosity. It only cares about the grand finale, the sold-out gallery exhibition, the glowing review in a major publication, the massive financial windfall. It despises the mundane process.
It wants the highlight reel.
Exactly. By deliberately choosing to celebrate the completion of a single difficult sketch, or a moment of encouragement from a mentor, or simply the discipline of showing up at the studio for 2 hours. The artist grounds themselves entirely in the present moment.
They take back control of the narrative.
They do. They reconnect with the authentic joy of the process, completely bypassing and starving the ego's insatiable demand for grand validation.
And the beautiful twist in the artist's narrative is where this process ultimately leads them. As they continued to paint, resilient against the rejections, their authentic core came into focus.
The fog lifted.
Yeah. They realized their ultimate goal wasn't actually to sell pieces to wealthy collectors. Their core drive was to connect with humanity through creativity. This realization naturally led them to begin mentoring young, struggling artists themselves and advocating for arts programs in underfunded schools.
They found their ultimate purpose in the pursuit and sharing of the craft, rather than in the ego-driven destination of fame.
Okay, I want to bring back the compass metaphor here to tie this all together. Think about how we are taught to view our goals. We are taught to view our aspirations like a train track.
Linear and fixed.
Right. You get on the train at station A, and you are locked onto the rails. You are physically forced to travel a predetermined path to station B. If a tree falls on the track, if you fail a class, if a gallery rejects you, if a pandemic hits, the train derails. You crash. It's over.
A highly fragile, highly susceptible model for living.
Exactly. But true aspirations, authentic drives, are not train tracks. They are a compass. They simply provide a true north. The artist's true north was creativity and connection.
So the destination wasn't fixed.
Right. Initially, the compass guided them to pursue gallery representation. But when that path became blocked by the reality of the art world, the compass didn't break. It just pointed them slightly to the left towards teaching, mentoring, and community building. They were still relentlessly following their true north, just navigating a different, more fulfilling terrain.
A compass, not a track. That perfectly encapsulates the operational reality of the healthy ego that Doivy describes in his concluding chapters. A healthy ego doesn't demand that the terrain perfectly match the map it drew in its head. It allows you to navigate the real, rugged terrain flexibly and resiliently.
So as we approach the end of this journey, I want you to think about your own life. Think about a dream you've had to delay, or a goal you felt forced to completely abandon.
It's hard to look at those moments.
It is. Think about the relationship that ended without closure, the career path that hit a brick wall, the cross-country move you couldn't afford to make. In the moment, it felt like a derailment. But looking back now, did that massive, painful failure actually force open a side door you never would have noticed otherwise?
Often, it does exactly that.
Did the shattering of your rigid plan force you to finally look down and recalibrate your compass?
When we synthesize the vast psychological territory we've covered today, merging Doivy's structural analysis in Ego Unmasked with the visceral human experiences detailed in The Nature of Heartbreak, a unified, incredibly powerful philosophy emerges.
It really snaps together beautifully.
It does. Doivy teaches us the mechanics. We must relentlessly work to shed our fragile and inflated egos to excavate our authentic selves. We have to strip away the masks that exhaust us.
And The Nature of Heartbreak provides the brutal, beautiful application of that theory. It proves that the fastest, most efficient, albeit the absolute most painful way the universe helps us strip away that false ego is through the crucible of loss.
Loss is the ultimate unmasking agent, whether that loss takes the form of a lover leaving a crumpled, cryptic note on a kitchen table, a desperately wanted engineering degree evaporating due to empty bank accounts, or a piece of your soul painted on a canvas being casually rejected by a gallery curator.
The heartbreak physically shatters the mask. It is an agonizing process to endure. But as the journaling lover realized in the silence of their empty house, the cracks in our hearts are not defects.
Their openings.
Yes. They are the exact apertures through which the radiant light of authenticity finally gets in. It is only in the rubble of our broken plans that we discover what is truly unbreakably essential.
The collision between our internal architect and the external world is never meant to destroy us. It is meant to renovate us.
A renovation of the soul.
Exactly. It forces us, sometimes against our will, to rebuild our lives on the bedrock of authenticity rather than the shifting, exhausting sands of the ego.
Wow, okay. We have covered a massive expanse of the human experience today, from the hidden operating system of the mind to the terrifying leap of vulnerability at an artisanal coffee shop, from the crushing weight of a college dropout shame to the beautiful harmonization of a small-town dreamer.
It's been an incredible journey through these texts.
It really has. To bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final provocative thought. I want you to carry this with you as you go about the rest of your day, as you interact with your colleagues, your partner, your children, and your own reflection.
I love this.
We started this hour by asking if the agonizing pain of a crushed dream or a shattered relationship was merely a roadblock, or if it was actually the map.
The ultimate question.
Right. If heartbreak, failure, and rejection are indeed the most efficient tools the universe possesses for destroying your false, exhausting ego and revealing your true, authentic self, then what if your biggest, most devastating setback wasn't an interruption of your life's story?
What if it was the prologue?
Exactly. What if the moment you thought you were ruined was actually the messy, beautiful, necessary beginning of who you were always meant to be? What if the universe breaks your heart just to set you free?
That is a profound perspective to carry into the world.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We encourage you to keep questioning the narratives you tell yourself, keep learning the mechanics of your own mind, and above all, keep embracing the beautiful, unpredictable messiness of the human experience. We'll catch you next time.